When he turned his back from shoulder to shoulder, it looked like as wide as the tailgate of a truck.
And just darkness, literal darkness, just came like all over, just all over me except where I was standing.
This thing let out the most blood-curdling, mind-blowing, spine-tingling scream that you've ever heard in your life, and it cut through me like a knife.
And I knew that they were going to take me. I just knew it. And then the next thing I can remember is being levitated.
Well, when I look in there, I see two big eyes staring back at me.
Hello and welcome. You're listening to the Bump Podcast, a place for the believers of the unexplained, monsters, and paranormal. Join us, and we'll go face to face with what goes bump in the night.
All right. Well, my name is Josh Robinson, and to kind of give an introduction of who I am, I'm a husband, father, pastor of a church in Madison, West Virginia, just down the road from you. It's called New Haven Church, and I'm also a co-host of a podcast called The Sword and the Staff, and we like to talk about a lot of fringe topics, paranormal topics, a lot of that kind of stuff, and we kind of approach it through a Christian type of lens, kind of examining some of that kind of stuff. My co-host Richie, he is a former practicing occultist who has become a Christian, and so we have a lot of interesting conversations between the two of us that has really got a following in some ways, and we're really happy about that. And that's kind of where I got familiar with you, is kind of in that same community. And so yeah, it's nice to meet you, and glad to be here on the podcast with you today.
Hey, thanks, Josh. It's nice to meet you too, man. Who knew that we were sitting so close to each other for all this time?
Right, I would have never imagined. No,
it's worked out though. Thankfully, I got a hold of Ward, or he got a hold of me, one or the other. I can't remember now. And, we kind of met each other through him.
Yeah.
And he was telling me, about Dark Holler.
Yeah.
And what went on with you during the baptism.
Yeah.
Of, one of your parishioners, I guess you was. If you don't mind, I think it would be great if I could get your perspective on everything that happened that day. I mean, at the time this airs.
Yeah.
Listeners will have heard Ward last week. So if you could tell it from your side, and we'll just kind of pick it apart a little bit, if you don't mind.
Yeah, that'd be great. Well, I'll kind of back us up a little bit and kind of give a little more background to it, and just kind of my history with Kristen, who is the girl who's actually that we're referring to here. So I'll say this. I met Ward during the filming of Dark Holler. But I've known Ward for years. Like, I've known Ward for probably, 5 years, something like that, half a decade now. And we met through similar mutual friends, through just kind of some of the church circles that we run in. And we got to know one another through that. We've been in a lot of theological debates over the years, and that kind of thing. That's what we like to do.
Yeah.
So anyway, that's kind of how I got to know Ward. And so kind of just preface it with that, and how I kind of got in. That'll lead us up at some point here to how I ended up involved with Dark Holler. So I've known him for some years. And so back in 2017, I planted a church. We started off originally in Chapmanville, West Virginia. Then we bounced to Logan, West Virginia, just down the road. Then we bounced back to Chapmanville, West Virginia. Now we've bounced to Madison, West Virginia. We trying our best to just find a building, that we could, have all our people in, and that kind of stuff. And so anyway, we have a family who has been attending our church now for 3 years, and great family, really faithful family. And the man who is his name is Derek Angel. He's actually in Dark Holler as well. So for everybody who gets to see Dark Holler, you'll see these people that you'll get to meet the people that I'm talking about here. But so Derek and his wife Misty, they plugged into our church back around 2019, somewhere like that. I think it was like the beginning of 2019. And so got to know them. He eventually became a deacon. He and I become friends, and all that kind of stuff, through the progress he made through his deacon candidacy and all that stuff. So during that, as that relationship was building, personally, and then also, in the church, I got to meet some of their family, and I got to meet his wife's sister, Kristen. Name's Kristen Bellamy. And whenever I first met Kristen, Kristen had been addicted to drugs for a while. And I don't know if I haven't got to listen to Ward's interview, so I don't know if he talked about kind of some of her background. Yeah. But so Kristen, though, so I knew a little bit about Kristen. I didn't know a ton about her, but what I mostly knew about her came through her sister, Misty. And it was mostly in the form of prayer requests. Being a pastor, you're all the time having people, hey, pray for my family member, that kind of thing. Right. So what I learned about Kristen primarily came through that. And basically what I knew about her at the time was that she had an addiction problem, and that she was also pairing that with practicing witchcraft. And she wasn't the type of, kind of teeny bopper, witch that you see like on Instagram, who's just using the hashtags like hashtag witch or, that kind of stuff. She wasn't into that. Like she was like seriously deep into the stuff that she was in, like where she, I didn't know it then, but I know now, like where she had her own altar and, was, doing things with that and, doing rituals and all this stuff. But anyway, so, I had met Kristen a couple times, and she didn't really seem too interested in anything that I had to say, or really just me as a person, honestly.
Right.
And she talks about that some in the film, where she said that if she was around a Christian during that point in her life, it was almost like uncomfortable for her. You know what I mean? Like there was just something about being around people who were Christians that just put her at an unease. And so I didn't know that at the time, but yeah, so I had met her, and, just knew a little bit about her. Had no idea that the struggle was as deep and as dark as it was. But so anyway, but I knew, like I said, I knew a little bit about her. So one day I get a call from Misty, who is her sister. And she basically says to me, hey, I have been sharing the gospel with my sister, Kristen, and she's asking to be baptized. I'm like, oh, okay. I'm like, this is the same sister, right? Yeah. The one who's, been who's been doing witchcraft and, who's, had the, drug. And she's like, yes. She's like, some of my family members have been over to the house and have shared the gospel with her. I came afterwards and, wanted to, talk with her as well. And she's professing faith in the death, burial, and resurrection of Christ for the forgiveness of sins. And she's like, and she's wanting to know if you'll baptize her. I'm like, well, if she's doing that, then, absolutely. So I was like, well, I'll tell you what. I was like, she's like, could you at least talk to her? I was like, absolutely. I was like, so, I'll meet you guys at Madison Park, which is just about a block away from where I'm at right now. It's at a little league park, all that. And I was like, absolutely. I'll meet you guys at Madison Park, and I'll talk to her and we'll see what's going on. And they're like, okay, excellent. Sounds good. So I load up in my car. This is a Sunday evening. This is after church. We'd had church that morning. It was really just out of the blue. And like I said, prior to this event, that's all I knew about Kristen. I didn't know anything else about her other than those things. So I loaded up in my car, and about, I don't know, it was about 6 or 7 p.m., something like that, somewhere in that time range. I I came down here to Madison Park, which is where we always do baptisms at. We've always done baptisms at Madison Park, just a really great location, that kind of thing. But anyway, so I got here, and whenever I got here, there was like just a bunch of people like from her family that was like here with her. And like, I had never really met the majority of them. And, like her mom is here, and like her cousins are here, and, her sister's here, her, Derek's here, her brother, he was at work. Yeah, he was at work at the time. But like her sister's here. And then there's some people from our church here who are personal friends with him. I'm just like, wow. I was like, I was not expecting this. And so, I see Kristen, she's sitting over at a picnic table that's sitting in front of it's about 50 yards up from the river. And she's sitting there with her mother. And so I'm like, oh, well, I guess I'll go over and talk to her. And so me and one of the men who is one of our elder candidates at our church, we had been talking prior to walking up, and I was like, well, let's go over here and see what's going on. So we walk over, and I introduce myself to Kristen, and I was like, hi, I'm Pastor Josh. I'm, your sister's pastor and Derek's pastor. And, I heard that you are professing faith in Christ. And, I don't know I think that at this point she was detoxing. I think that she was coming off of the drugs that she was using. But she was very, she's not the same person at this point that she is today. I'll just say that. Okay. Like the person that she was whenever I met her here, it was just entirely different than how she is. So anyway, and she's like, she's looking up at me, and she's like, yeah. And like, she doesn't have a lot to say. Like, she's not like, like, if anybody knows Kristen, like Kristen's not especially at this point, she's not a super like loud person. Like, she's not somebody who's super talkative, very reserved, like very shy and backwards. She's a little bit less backwards now, now that she's no longer, struggling with addiction and things like that. But anyway, so I was like, oh, okay. So I'm like, you believe this, and this, like you believe death, burial, resurrection of Christ. She's like, yeah, I believe that. I was like, okay, well, I was like, I see no reason to not baptize you, in order to be baptized, that's what you have to believe. And so I was like, so I guess we'll just walk down here to the river together, and, we'll do this thing. And she's like, okay. So so her and I and the other man, who is one of our elder candidates, we proceed to the Little Coal River, and which is just down off the dock from where we're at. And we get in the water. And as we get into the water, like we walk on out through there, and she talks about now that as she was walking into the water, it just felt like that there was this presence stopping her from trying to go out. She actually broke her toe immediately getting into the water. Like, so just this weird, just freak like accident. Yeah. Like just really odd. I've baptized all kinds of people in that river, and like, I've never seen anything like that. So anyway, so we make our way out to the river. We get about midways into the river, and so we kind of face the crowd, and I begin to kind of tell what the little bit of the story that I know about Kristen. And basically I address the crowd, and I say this. I said, this is Kristen. Kristen has given her life to Christ. She's believing in the gospel. And as some of you guys know, she's had struggles and darkness in her life, and she's going to need your help in the fight and in the battle to overcome a lot of this. And those are some of the things that I remember saying. I would have to go back. There's a video of it out there. That's in my mind, that's what I remember. It's something along those lines, but it was interesting. So after I addressed the crowd, before we baptized her, I said to her, hey, do you mind if I pray for you? She's like, no, go ahead. And I'm not kidding you. So here's the reason why. I want to lay out the rationale as to why I decided. So, yeah, in church history, whenever baptisms were done, exorcisms always accompanied them.
I didn't know that.
Most people don't know that.
Yeah.
But if you look back throughout church history, there were baptismal rites where the recipient of baptism would renounce the devil. Like, you can just Google that and you can find it. It's like, I renounce the devil and all his vain pomp and, all this stuff. But there was kind of this little, ritual or liturgy that kind of went with baptisms that was a minor exorcism, is what it's called. And, if you think about the symbolism of why it makes sense, because, it's kind of like, the story in the Bible, right? When God brings the Israelites out of Egyptian bondage and he brings them through the Red Sea, right?
Right.
It's kind of the same symbolism, right? So that's a deliverance, right? God delivers them out of the kingdom of darkness and then brings them into the kingdom of light. So that's really what's going on in baptism. And that's why the church attached this ritual to baptism, because they saw it as being very similar. God taking someone out of the kingdom of darkness, bringing them through the waters and bringing them into the kingdom of light. And so anyway, so I knew that, and I thought to myself, I was like, if anybody is experiencing demonic oppression or even possession, it would be this girl.
Yeah. But
just because of what little bit I know about her, just because I know that she's dabbled in this stuff, and there's this history with drug, this would be the person who would struggle with this kind of stuff. I'm like, so I think that this would be a great time to say, this traditional exorcism prayer that goes along with this. So I asked her if I could pray with her. She said, absolutely. So I basically said a version of this baptismal rite, this exorcism prayer. And, basically it's asking God that if there's any types of spiritual warfare, any types of demonic entities oppressing this person, that he would cast them out and that he would judge them, is basically what's going on with it. So I pray this. And as soon as I pray this, there is a reaction to this that I've never experienced before, and I've never experienced since. So as soon as I said that, she starts, like, it's almost like this type of convulsion. I don't know how, that's the closest thing, that it's like this low key, just shaking behavior. Never seen anything like it before. Never seen anything since. Every baptism that we do at our church has this exorcism that accompanies. I've never seen anything like it.
Wow.
And I look, me and the other guy, like, we look at one another and we're like, okay, we've never seen this before.
Right.
And so, we're like, okay, well, we'll just keep going. And so at that time, I grabbed one of her arms, and he grabs one of her other arm. And I look to the crowd, and I kind of start to say the triune formula that you have for baptism. You say the person's name is like, Kristen, we now, because of your profession of faith, we now baptize you in the name of the Father and the Son and the Holy Spirit. Right. And before we ever got to finish the baptismal formula, before I said, we baptize you in the name of the Father and the Son, and she starts falling backwards. Like, I've never, just really odd. I've never experienced anything like it, but it kind of worked out, because we were fixed. I said, and Holy Spirit. And then we just went on with the her falling, and just picked her straight up. So we plunged her down into the water. And then when we brought her back up, there was this just piercing scream that came from her whenever she come up out of the water. And as a pastor, I've witnessed a lot of different types of behaviors at baptisms, right? Like I've seen people who are very stoic,
right,
like who go down into the water and they come back out and there's not a ton of emotion.
Right.
I've seen people who go down into the water and then they come out and they're crying. I've seen people who went down on the water and come out and there's a little bit of shouting.
Yeah.
Especially in our area, right?
Yeah.
Like, yeah. I've never baptized someone and brought them back through the waters and heard a scream. And then after this scream, there was this type of just the only thing that I can compare it to is like a heaving. Like there, like you're if you've ever tried, if you've ever been sick and you're throwing up and you like dry heave, there's just nothing coming out.
Yeah.
That's what it was like. And then after that, she did that like 3 to 4 times. Like the scream, kind of like the heaving, and then she puts her hands in her face and just starts crying like this. And like I said, I've seen a lot of behaviors, but I've never seen anything crying quite like that.
Right.
So as this is happening, the other man who's helping me baptize her is very startled. Okay. Like very startled. So he actually sees it and he actually takes a step or 2 back and was kind of in like a defensive posture, kind of like this.
Yeah.
Like kind of had his hands out, like didn't really know what to think. So anyway, after she puts her hands in her face, face in her hands and starts crying. We help her back to the bank, and we get her to the bank. And whenever she gets there, you would think that she would go and like run to her family and celebrate, and all that kind of stuff that comes along with the baptism, right?
Right.
You've got everybody who's coming, who's there, and they're like, "Oh, we're so proud of you," and all that kind of stuff. Well, that wasn't what happened. So what happened was we get her back to the bank, and she sits down at the edge of the bank, right on where the concrete's starting to start. And she grabs her head like this, and she just starts rocking back and forth like this in kind of like a curled up position, sitting down.
Oh my gosh.
Very, very strange behavior. And so her family like comes to her.
Yeah.
And so at this point, like I've never seen anything like that, but I don't say anything about it. Like, I say, talk to the family, and they're like, "Thank you so much." And, that kind of stuff. And, I say goodbye to the family, and that's it. So I get in the car, and my wife is waiting in the car. She went ahead of me.
Right.
And as I'm sitting there, as I sat down, she said, "Josh, I'm going to ask you something." I said, "Okay." She said, "You think there was a demon coming out of that girl?"
Yeah.
And I was like, I said, I wasn't going to say anything about it. But that's exactly what I thought. Yeah. I was like, and the interesting thing is whenever we were out in the water, I actually prayed a traditional style exorcism prayer while we were out there. And then that happened immediately afterwards.
Yeah.
My wife's kind of just mind blown at this point because, she's been with me in this entire journey. She's seen a lot of baptisms. She's like, "I've never seen a baptism like that." So I go home, and whenever I get home, I start getting phone calls. And mind you, at this point, I'm a very skeptical person. Right. Like, I'm one of those, like, prior to this event, I was one of those types of ministers who wasn't even sure if things like this happened today. And the reason why is because you see so much of it on, televangelism, that kind of stuff, the evangelism channels, and it's done so badly, and a lot of people do it to try to get your money and, that kind of stuff. So that really turned me off on a lot of this stuff and really just led me to the conclusion that a lot of this stuff was fake, and so honestly, I just thought that a lot of that stuff was for show. And I wasn't entirely convinced that this type of stuff still happened today. Or if it did, it was very rare. When I went to seminary, the way that they kind of trained me to think about this type of stuff was to, they kind of teach you to kind of almost view it in a disenchanted way.
Mm-hmm.
And what I mean by disenchanted means is a purely naturalistic, scientific view. Like there's nothing like supernatural about it. Like most of the time you're taught to view this as, oh, the person has a mental illness or something like that. And, it's not demon possession, that type of stuff doesn't happen, and they'll even say things like, a lot of what people thought throughout church history was demon possession was actually, mental illnesses. They just didn't have the right language and categories for it, that kind of thing. So that was kind of the framework that I was rolling with at this point. And then this event happened. And then whenever I get home, I start getting calls from some of our parishioners who were there. And I get a call from one of the women, a woman who was there, who's also in Dark Holler, who is one of Kristen's best friends. And she says to me, she's like, I'm going to be honest. I was very startled by what I saw. I've never seen anything like it. I know Kristen. I know what type of person she is. And I have never seen her do or anything like that. Do you think that a demon come out of her? So this is a second person who's not out in the water with me, who has no idea that I've said this, baptismal rite, who's drawing the same conclusion. And so I had a conversation with her. Then after that, I get a call from her sister-in-law, or her sister and her brother-in-law. This is after he gets home from work. He works in the coal mines. And he says to me, they've got me on speakerphone. They're talking to me together. And both of them, Derek's asking me what's going on, what's happened. And Misty says, Josh, that's my sister. I've known her my entire life. I know what type. She's like, I've never seen anything like that. Do you think that a demon came out of her?
Oh my gosh.
Yeah.
Yeah.
And so, had the conversation with them. And then it was approximately somewhere between, 11 to midnight that night. I finally talked to the other man who was with me doing the baptism. We're talking. I'm like, what did you think about today? He's like, I felt like that we got, what little bit we got to talk to her. I felt confident that she, was professing faith. And I'm like, no. I'm not talking about that. I'm sure of that. I'm talking about the actual event itself. And this man is if you know this man, he is a very careful man, very skeptical man too. He kind of come out of that type of tradition where the stuff that I was talking about. Yeah. And so, he came out of that. He knows kind of the dangers of it. And so anyway, he paused for a minute and he said to me, I'm going to be honest. He said, whenever we were standing out there in the water and she came up and she did what she did, I thought that something maybe come out of her. And I said to him, I'm not entirely sure that's what happened. At this point, I'm still kind of holding to this type of, skeptical type of, like, oh, I'm not, maybe it was, maybe it wasn't. I was like, but I said, here's one thing I know. I've never witnessed anything like that in my life. And it's interesting that it happened whenever there was an exorcism rite, baptismal rite that accompanied it. I was like, so that's the event. And after the event, Kristen went to rehab. I think she actually went to rehab the next day or the day after or something like that. Right. She actually went to the hospital for a toe and, all that stuff. But anyway, so that was kind of the way that I approached the event. I was like, maybe it was, maybe it wasn't. I don't know. I didn't want there to be like hysteria or, something like that.
All right.
But anyway, whenever she got back from rehab, one of the very first things that she did was actually call me. And she told me her perspective on it from her end.
Yes.
Very different person at this point. And she confirmed to me that was what she had experienced. And so from that point on, I was comfortable with saying, this is what happened.
Yeah. Wow. Gosh.
Yeah.
See, demons and possession, that has always been the one thing that's scared me.
Yeah.
I was raised Catholic.
Interesting.
And to me, it was very real. I remember I was a little boy, my grandmother was watching 2020 and they had like this exorcism on TV. And I hid in the bathroom, you know what I mean? Because I couldn't handle it. And that's always been the thing that's frightened me until here recently when I figure how much power we have over, these spirits and stuff.
Right.
But let me ask you, man. So she confirmed that she felt it leave, right?
Yeah. Yeah. She also said to me and confirmed that whenever she went down on the water, you remember me saying that she fell?
Yeah.
She said that whenever at that point, the reason why she fell was because she was experiencing some type of phenomena where something was shoving her down into the river.
Really?
Yeah.
Okay.
So it kind of made sense to me of some of the odd behavior that I experienced. At the time, I had no category for it, but after I talked with her and she confirmed it, I was like, wow, this makes a lot of sense of the stuff that I thought was very strange.
Yeah, like the convulsions might have been more of a struggle that you're feeling her fighting against it, and the broken toe. Yeah. That's an attack, right?
Yeah, that's very.
It was trying to keep her from going.
Yeah. And she talks about that. Like, and that's one of the things if you listen to her perspective and her testimony about it, she talks about that as she's walking down, there is just this struggle going on. And like, there is something trying to keep her from going down into the river. And then basically it's like, hey, well, since you finally come out here and you had the courage to do it, I'm just going to put you down on the river and I'm going to keep you here.
Yeah. Oh my gosh. That's still scary, man.
Yeah. It power. Honestly. Yeah. It was something that startled me. Yeah. And honestly, in some ways still does, but yeah, yeah.
So, okay, let me ask this.
Yeah.
When she came up, that scream, was that her scream? Or was that a demonic kind of thing? Because initially I thought, she come up screaming and then starts crying. Maybe it was from relief.
Yeah.
But was there something, was it still hanging on? Was she purging it? Was that what the gagging and stuff was?
If I were the one to answer the question from my perspective, that's what I think was going on. I think that at this point, what's going on with Kristen is, I think in the process of the baptism. Now, so I'll say this: I don't believe that baptism saves. Like I'm not the type of Christian that believes that baptism saves. There are people out there who would disagree with me on that and think that. Right. But what I think happened is I think that God in this particular event saved Kristen through this baptism.
Yeah.
And I think that the entirety of the event was the thing that led to what I would say the expulsion of this entity in what appeared to be heaving or something like that. That's what I would say. I think that a lot of people think that baptism saves just in and of itself. You know what I mean?
Yeah.
I think that it took. I think all of the conversations leading up to this event probably opened her eyes in some ways, and perhaps was working on her, and led to conviction and things like that. And I think that the prayers and the proclamation of the gospel in the river, and prior to that, and just the whole event, I think God miraculously used this whole event for that. And I think that's what, personally, I think that's what was going on in that behavior.
Yeah, that's exactly what that sounds like to me too.
Yeah. Interesting fact. Whenever Ward, I don't know if he talked about this in his interview with you. Whenever Ward rolled back the film and was examining the film, there was a weird EVP on that part of the film. And like, it really sounded like in the video, a type of animalistic type of noise. I don't know if he mentioned that or not, but
he did.
It's in
actually.
Dark Holler.
He did. Yeah.
Yeah. I didn't know that until months. Well, until we got into filming Dark Holler, way on down the line. And, we had kind of given him all of the evidence from the event, and he was, sorting through it himself. He was actually the one that found it. But it was the scream that she let out was harrowing, and it's something that I will probably never forget.
Man. Well, I'm as horrible as some of the events sounded. I'm so glad she went through with that. You know, that she was delivered, and it's changed her life.
Yeah, she's an entirely different person today, and has been since. Like it really is amazing if you were to talk to her today, and like she's a different person. It's
because I know we're from the same area. You know what I mean?
Yeah.
Initially, I would imagine, from a spectator's position, if I was standing there watching, you would almost believe, if you didn't know her, that it would be some kind of theatrics, some kind of dramatic reaction. Yeah. But if you have all these people coming and saying, that's not her, that's not the type of person she is, and she was reserved, and that gives you so much more peace of mind knowing that you were a part of a miracle, man.
Yeah. Well, that was the thing for me that really helped seal the deal on my thoughts about it, was just because, I remember asking people afterwards, just because I was trying to dig in further and to just figure out like what it was that I experienced. And, I remember asking people, because I didn't know Kristen that well at that point.
Right.
And just like, is she like is she a dramatic person? Is she like, is she a theatrical type of person? Like, and then everybody's like, no, like and the more that I've been around her, from Dark Holler, and, even the interview that we did on Cultish and stuff like that. Like she is who they said she was. And, that was a pretty foundational for me to draw some of the conclusions that I did. So.
And it's changed your life.
It has.
It took you from the, skeptical Christian, because I feel like, Christianity is very watered down, It took you from that to the man you are today, reading Dr. Heiser's work, and
it's true. I mean, that event, it changed my life. And not only did it change my life, but it changed our church's life.
Yeah.
Because that led to me getting into the work of Dr. Heiser, and, who talks about the unseen realm and the reality of things like angels and demons and the different types of spiritual entities that are out there, and how they interact with the world and that kind of stuff. That led to me teaching a lot of this stuff to our local church, which in turn changed their world. And so, like I said, there's definitely the part of Christianity out there where it is watered down, and like some of the stuff that you see on TV is fake.
Right.
But on the other hand, like, you can't throw the baby out with the bathwater, like I was doing.
Yeah.
There is the side out there too, though, that is discerning and isn't into that, and like really are encountering things like that. And that event took me down the rabbit hole in some ways. So.
Well, I'm glad it did. Like I told you before we started recording, just in the last year or two, my eyes were opened up to the reality of all, that everything's real. Spiritual warfare is literally going on, whether we realize it, whether we agree with it. We're dealing with it,
Yep.
The more I hear, the less I don't want to say I don't believe in science. That would be ridiculous. But the more I hear, the more I believe that a lot of these are a misdiagnosis, when there is an oppression or a possession, and we're slapping a label and giving it a pill and just feeding that demon, keeping it happy,
Yeah, no doubt. It's true. And honestly, this event has changed the way that I pastor people. Prior to this event, somebody would have come up to me and said, I'm experiencing demonic oppression or affliction. And I'd have been like, maybe, like, you probably need to go see your doctor, is probably what I would have told them. And, now, like, I feel like that's just not a great way to pastor people now,
right.
But here's the reality. That's how most pastors are taught to pastor.
Yeah, I get
and so for me, it's changed just my practical, day to day with people. Now, like, I try to help people who are dealing with actual mental illnesses and things like that, and try to point them to a doctor. But at the same time, I also now have the categories and understand how spiritual warfare, how those types of things happen in someone's life. And Kristen was, honestly, in some ways, she was the perfect case. Like, she was, not only was she using mind altering drugs, but she was also, she had dabbled enough in the unseen realm, using witchcraft and things like that, to where she was open to different types of spiritual beings out there that led to what she, experienced today. And so,
So you think, was she dabbling at that point, Josh, or was she practicing?
It was more than dabbling at that point. She was practicing. She was deep in at that point.
Yeah. Cause I was wondering, how did she open herself up? Well, I know you can through drugs alone, you probably can lower your energy enough to let this stuff in.
Yeah.
But was she using Ouija boards and stuff like that? Or
she was, so from what I understand, she was using a lot of I know that she was using things like crystals and things like that. And she was I know she was burning different types of things and kind of using them as offerings, on her altar and stuff like that. But like the thing that's interesting is, like, she was actually invoking the like actual spiritual entities in her practices. And in particular, one of those spiritual entities that she was invoking is a known Mesopotamian demonic being named Lilith.
I knew you were going to say that. That's what Word said too.
Yeah.
Oh, wow.
And the interesting thing about Lilith is she's actually mentioned in the scriptures, in the book of Isaiah. And he talks about her in a symbolic way, because spiritual beings have symbolism attached to them and stuff like that. And she has like owl symbolism attached to her in the scriptures, and not only in the scriptures, but even in the Mesopotamian world. Like, if you look up depictions of Lilith or Lilu or Lilith, some of the names that she has, like, you'll see owls with her. And it's there's a lot of stuff in Dark Holler that happens with owls and night birds and things like that that's really interesting, that connects into this case. But yeah, so it's more than just she was dabbling. She was actually invoking these known spiritual beings and asking them and soliciting them for things. And
oh my gosh,
that's what happens. You end up under the influence, and in her case, more than under the influence, possessed by spiritual beings like this. So this stuff is very, very dangerous. Most people think that it's harmless and it's all in good fun, and that kind of stuff, especially like we're getting close to Halloween, right? It's the season to play with Ouija boards and to dabble in things. And
no, it ain't.
No, that's right. It's definitely not the season to dabble in things. That's how you end up in trouble and end up, if you keep going to the lengths that she did, how you end up in serious trouble. So
yeah, man. So how did Ward find out about this? Like, yeah, because you kept this pretty well private, right? You didn't run to the Logan Banner or something about it. You just
no, it was very private. And even in our church, it was very private. Like, it's only the handful of people who were there from our church knew about it. So it wasn't even something like that we went just talking about and spreading like in our church. So Ward and I connected back during COVID. So, I mean, we've been talking for years, and like I said, been a part of the same circles, but he and I have probably had more in common than others in that circle. And so I can't remember if I messaged him or if he messaged me now, But basically, he had kind of fallen down a rabbit hole during COVID and was like coming across a lot of similar things,
Hellier, right?
Hellier. Yeah. Hellier was one of them. Which I ended up watching Hellier during 2022.
I did too. Yeah. In quarantine.
Yeah. Yep. We did too. And, he ran into Hellier, and then he ran into a lot of just threads that connect to that in some ways. And he knew that I was a pastor. And so he basically asked me if I had come across anything strange. And I was like, oh yeah, I've got something strange for you. And so it basically led to me telling him the story of Kristen. And he's like, oh wow, I need to learn more about this. And that actually led to an interview that he and I did. He's in Ohio. I'm in West Virginia. So it led to our initial interview that actually led to Dark Holler. So he and I talked, it was probably over an hour, and he set up cameras, just because he wanted to get it all on camera, and because he didn't know what was going to come of it at the time. I don't think I didn't either, but it was basically me telling him the story of Kristen and what all happened. And after I told him the story, he was in, he was hooked, and he had to find out more about this story, which led to him coming down to West Virginia and for like a week straight, just shooting different things and then learning new things about Kristen and her story. Actually, during this process, we found out that the things that Kristen had experienced were not novel. They weren't just with her. They were things that her family had been experiencing for several generations. Like there has been this dark presence following her family, and her uncle had actually been a practicing witch and had also experienced possession like she had. And he was somebody who was very significant in her life in some ways, and that she looked up to. So
yeah, he had said something about how this exorcism, this event wasn't the entire story of Dark Holler, that it opened the door to a lot of stuff.
And it's the exorcism is kind of a symptom of a much larger thing. Like it's the, like I said, I didn't know how deep this rabbit hole went. Whenever I met Kristen, I baptized her, and then the exorcism happened. As Dark Holler was happening, and I was around her family and hearing them tell these stories that I had no idea about. And honestly, some of them didn't even know about it. The rabbit hole went way, way deeper.
Yeah. Well, I can't wait to get to see, the series that he's doing. And I think he's going to send me a link to, like a trailer or something, a little something. I want to see that. But when I found him on Instagram, I don't know how I found him either on Instagram. I saw pictures of downtown Logan, I thought, man, I used to walk around on these streets, And so I started clicking through, and I sent him a message. I said, do I know you? And he said, you might, who are you? And we hit it off.
So we got down here. Whenever he got down here, basically conversations happened between me and him. So like, going further down the rabbit hole led me to investigating all sorts of high strangeness and just weird stuff. And, it basically, like, you'll hear me in Dark Holler kind of giving Ward an overview of some of the high strangeness and the weirdness that's occurred in our area, from the Mamie Thurman stuff, and some of the phenomena that happens with her to, there's reports, of things like devil dogs and, things like that. And, not just that, but, there's old, legends of, at certain times of the year, the spirit of Devil Ann's Hatfield up, down Sarah Ann comes up out of the grave and, replays a baptism. There's all kinds of little weird local stories.
Yeah.
There's even UFO sightings going all the way back to the 70s in our area.
Yeah.
And so I kind of filled him in on a lot of that stuff. And then interestingly enough, a lot of the stuff kind of connected in together in some ways. And Kristen's story falls into a larger story that's at play.
It's kind of like our own Hellier, but holier.
Yeah, right. Yeah. Instead of us ending up down in, the cave somewhere and invoking Pan, it ends up in a river invoking Jesus. So I mean, honestly, I would say that even some of the stuff here that we found, whether, Greg and Dana and the Hellier folks aren't aware of us or anything like that, but there's a lot of the stuff that actually connects in with a lot of the stuff that they're finding and doing. I think, I mean, some of it connects into, Point Pleasant stuff and Mothman stuff. And then, a lot of that type of stuff. So, which is right up their alley.
Yeah. I think it all connects. And like I was telling Ward, our area is supposedly, the Native Americans call it the dark and bloody ground, right?
Yeah. Between
Southern West Virginia, Eastern Kentucky, the region. It was like a hunting ground, but it wasn't so much of a place to raise your family,
Yeah.
And
I think that has a lot to do with the phenomena in our area. I think that the Native American presence here and, also you have paganism, which from a Christian perspective, and people may disagree with me, who have differing perspectives, but from a Christian perspective, that would, that could explain a lot of the weird phenomena here, because we have geographical areas being, from my perspective, again, being defiled with pagan worship, invoking spiritual entities.
Yeah.
And like, why would we not think that they're responding to this? You know what I mean? So,
nobody's telling them to leave. So
that's right. Yeah, that's right. And in honestly, that's my theory. I have a theory of everything on why this area is the way that it is. And I think that, my theory basically is this. My theory is that this land is under what somebody like Mike Heiser and what the Bible would call a principality. A principality is basically a spiritual being that was placed over the nations at Babel. Like Deuteronomy 32, whenever God he spreads out the nations in the Babel event in Genesis chapter 11, he installs angelic beings over the nations.
Yes.
And in the Bible, the name that they get attached to them are principalities. Principalities simply just means princes. Mm-hmm. So what happens is those spiritual beings end up rebelling against the one true God. And that's where the gods of the nations come from.
Right.
And so, what happens from there is the nations are scattered, right? Yeah. We know that at some point in the history of the world, there were things like land bridges that connected continents that are no longer connected. And perhaps even continents were closer together and hadn't spread out at that point. We don't know. But you could see how people could spread out to these places. And you could see, I call it in some ways Babel in your backyard. And here's what I mean by that. You see things like Egyptian style architecture.
Yes.
In the Americas.
Yes.
Like if you go to South America, you see things like pyramids, right? They have very similar architecture and it's all the same worldview, right? Like at the top of these pyramids, it's like a holy mountain, right? Like you're meeting the gods there.
Right.
And that's what they would do. A lot of the times there were, temples that sat at the top of these pyramids, Inca and, Aztecs and stuff like that. They would have a temple at the top of them. They would make sacrifices at the top of them and roll heads down the steps.
Right.
But you get to South Charleston, West Virginia.
There you go.
And even the Serpent Mound.
Yep.
And you have high places, They're different, but what are they? Well, they're mounds.
They're mounds.
But they're high places, and then there's people buried in them, and there's ceremonial ashes in them, and those types of things. So how does that get here?
Right.
There's
giants in those.
There's giants in those mounds. So my theory is that this event from Genesis chapter 11, the scattering of the nations, some of those people with that worldview scattered to the Americas. And so whenever they scatter to the Americas, guess what comes with them? The principalities that they worship.
Yeah.
And guess what comes with the principalities? A lot of weird, strange phenomena. Desecration of lands, of grounds, darkness, that type of thing. And so that's my theory on a lot of this stuff.
Josh, I agree with you 100%. I feel the exact same way. You're not alone.
Yeah.
Did you listen to my episode about on the Trail of Giants?
I started to. I haven't got to finish it yet, but I've listened to a little bit of it.
Okay. That his name's Adam Stokes. He went to I think a Yale Divinity School.
Yeah.
He went to Duke University. He got his doctorate somewhere else. I can't remember off the top of my head. But his theory, his research, because he still studies ruins and everything else, was that some Israelites or Egyptians or, commingling of made their way over to here.
Yeah.
And what we're seeing is basically American pyramids, and that it all ties in. And I'm right there with you, because he didn't want to necessarily say that these giants in the mounds, might be, biblical giants, that they were just maybe a big race of people.
Right.
But, I'm with you, man. I think that what we have here from 5,000, however many thousands, 9,000 years ago, this goes straight back to principalities. I think it goes back to biblical days. I'm so glad you said it the way you did, because you're much more well versed in this kind of talk than I am. I don't know what I'm talking about. I know how I feel and what I think, and you're saying it all out loud, and I love it.
Yeah. Well, it may surprise people to hear that in some ways, but I think that's one of the reasons why our work at Sword and Staff has appealed to a lot of people in the paranormal community, because we are able to basically take a lot of the same things that they've been saying for a very long time and able to place it in a framework and say, actually your worldview overlaps with the biblical worldview, and they're not actually at odds with one another.
Exactly. It's all real. It's
all real.
It's all real,
Yeah. You're not crazy. All of this stuff. Yeah. There's another book that I read. I actually have it back here on my shelf, called Through New Eyes by James Jordan. And he talks about the symbolism of holy places. And one thing that holy places all have in common is they're all high places.
Yep.
So, and they take on different forms in different cultures, but pyramids are one, right? That's high. That's a high spot, right? And then you've got what's called, you've got the mounds, which are the same thing. They're artificial, man-made high places. And then you've got obelisks, which you see those all over Egypt too. But all of this stuff, it all corresponds to one another. It's all used for principality worship. It's it all fits together.
Yeah. Every time, well, maybe not every time, but a lot of the times in the Bible, when God comes to talk to somebody, where do they meet him at?
High grounds.
Right. On the mountain, right?
Yep.
Up on the
Moses, Mount Sinai, right?
Yeah.
Even Eden is on a mountain. We learn that in Ezekiel, and the rivers flow down off of that mountain and water the world. And then, Jesus gives his famous sermon on the mount. He's transfigured on a mountain. Yes. The last words that he gives to his disciples in Matthew 28 is on a mountain. The church in Hebrews 12 is called a holy mountain, Mount Zion.
Yeah. So of course they're going to build mountains to reach to their gods, right?
That's right. That's the worldview. And so that's how you end up with this worldview in your backyard, because it came from that place with this worldview, and it ended up here.
Yeah. Now, if you can convince people, like I was watching Wrath of the Titans last night, not Clash, but the second one.
Yeah.
And, and they're going into Tartarus you know, and you got these old gods chained up down there, and you know, all the demigods running around that people were worshiping and stuff. And the whole time I'm telling my wife, I'm like, this is real, you know.
Yeah.
These are
Tartarus
the lesser gods, you know.
Tartarus is real.
Yeah. And,
Peter talks about it in the New Testament.
she's like, just watch the movie, you know. And I'm like, I can't help it. I want people to know.
Yep.
Because God, our God, is the Most High. That doesn't. If He's the Most High, there'd be some middle ground guys, right? You know, these lesser gods
that's right.
made up Greek theology, and
that's right.
Roman.
That's 100% right.
Yes.
Yep. They're the principalities that are in rebellion to Him. You know,
exactly.
And, yep. They're Deuteronomy 32. They're the sons of God. All of that. You know, the interesting thing is I'm actually going to be talking about Tartarus here in the next couple of weeks.
Awesome.
Yeah, Peter actually talks about that's where the angels from Genesis chapter 6 are kept in gloomy chains until the day of darkness.
Yes.
And it's interesting because in Greek myth, who is it that's kept in Tartarus? It's the Titans.
Right.
So
yes,
huge overlap here between worldviews.
Yeah, I probably lost about 500 listeners just now. I probably went too far for them, but
went too far.
It's okay. It's all right. They can tune in next week.
There we go.
Well, Josh, I know it's a little late, so if you would like to just tell everybody where they can find your podcast, because I love it. I want everybody to hear it. All your social medias.
Yeah, absolutely. So you can find us on any major podcasting platform. Our podcast is called The Sword and Staff. And like I said, we're on Apple Podcast, we're on Spotify, we're on Google Podcasts, all of that. We're also on Instagram and Facebook. Both of our handles on those are at Sword and Staff Order. So you can find us there. We're also on Twitter. I actually don't handle any of our Twitter stuff. Richie handles all that. He likes Twitter, but it's Sword and Staff WV there. So you can find us there on Twitter as well. We also have a blog. You can just type in, it's medium.com/Sword and Staff Order, if I'm not mistaken. It's been a while since we've wrote any blogs, but we like to write on occasion. Now for Dark Holler stuff, you can find Dark Holler all over the place. It's on Instagram at Dark Holler or Dark Holler Film. I have to check on that. Let me see. Wrong. Let me double check.
Okay.
Too much stuff to keep up with these days.
That's all right, man. I think it is Dark Holler Film.
I think it is Dark Holler Film. Yep, it's Dark Holler Film.
Okay.
Yep. So you can follow the work of Dark Holler. It's at Dark Holler Film on Instagram. It's Dark Holler on Facebook. I think that if you there's also a website too for Dark Holler. Let me find it real quick. Yeah, darkhollerfilm.com. So there's a website and there's some information that's posted there about the film and that kind of stuff. So, but yeah, also if you're interested in our church work, you can find us at newhavenwv.com. We're New Haven Church on all our social media platforms. So awesome. You can find my work at all of those places.
You're not hard to find. Is that what you're saying?
No, not at all. Not at all.
Awesome. Well, thank you so much. I just want to ask, is there anything else, any other How Strange stories that you want to throw out there that we didn't cover that we might want to cover? Or you want to hold for later?
Well, I'll say this. We're digging into a lot of high strangeness cases and exploring them and investigating them. Some local. We're fixing to actually head to Point Pleasant here not too long from now. And I think that Ward's actually going to help with us, help out on that trip. And we're actually going to be recording some content from out there. Hopefully we can find some interesting things still yet going on in Point Pleasant and connect it to some of the stuff that we've been talking about here today. So we've got that going on, not happened yet, but whenever we get something going with that, maybe we can tell that story at some point. So
sweet. And I know Ward's going to go hang out with Tony here in a couple of weeks, right?
Yes, that's correct.
Yeah. He's already dropped that nugget on us, so I can go ahead and share it. So
yeah, he was excited about that. He had told me about it.
Good deal, man. Well, Josh, thank you so much for coming on the show. Yeah, it means a lot to me. I can't wait to put it out here. It'll be out shortly. If there's anything I can do for you, if you want to just meet up, have a cup of coffee somewhere, just let me know, man. Holler at me.
Yeah, absolutely, man. My pleasure. And thanks so much for having me on. I really appreciate it.
Hey, thank you, brother.
Yeah, no problem.
All right.